I've been thinking recently about the role that reading and writing have played in my life and my relationship to it at this point as well. So, for me, reading and writing and journaling played a very big role in a kind of transitional phase from kind of my teenage years to early adulthood and being out on my own. I really was the first time that I discovered my love for reading and my love for writing, and it was a significant point of transition. I would say, especially kind of 18, 19, 20 years old, when I was first kind of out on my own in the world, materially and physically away from my family, but also intellectually working to define my life for myself, define my own worldview, define my own values. And I found in books the opportunity to extend my horizons. I found new perspectives, new ways that I could find a source of identity. To think of myself as a writer, and to think of myself who loves reading, and the way that offered new possibilities for understanding myself and being in the world. And so that's a really crucial phase, that kind of adolescent phase and early adult phase, psychologically for most people, because they're making that transition, because I was making that transition, whereas starting to define my life for myself. And so recently I've been reading Alice Miller, a psychologist. She's a psychologist, importantly, who broke away from a lot of the orthodoxies of psychoanalysis and was really able to define a perspective for herself and connect better with patients and understand the kind of things they were going through by breaking with some of these theories or patterns that Freud was really fixed on and really believed that psychoanalysis should continue to follow, from his time onward. And so the work is Thou Shalt Not Be Aware. And so one chapter in particular that I've been reading and that stood out to me a lot is called The Pain of Separation and Autonomy. And she draws a really interesting parallel here, where she talks about the experience of the infant's experience of early attachment and the process of attachment, and then from the process of attachment where the child learns to become more autonomous and independent of the mother. So first the child goes through a period where they're totally dependent on the mother for all of their needs, but if the mother is supportive in the right way, that allows the child to grow into a better sense of autonomy, right? To accept the bottle instead of relying on her breast, or to comfort themselves without always needing the mother, and kind of establishing that bit of independence and accepting what Freud would call, from just the pure pleasure principle to the reality principle, being able to tolerate not having your needs immediately satisfied, but rather allowing yourself to kind of tolerate delay, to exercise patience, and know that you can be patient and still have your needs met. And so all of that is really essential to the early attachment experience and the kind of experience we have with our mothers, and whether our mothers are supportive and adequate, or whether our mothers are selfish or foster a kind of dependency, or are acting out their own childhood drama and their own traumatic experiences on the child. And so that ends up being a parallel between that early attachment experience and the adolescent period, where the child, again, or early adulthood period, where the early adult is breaking away from the family, the comfort of the family, the support of the family, and moving in toward more independence. And so so she describes how, while making this transition for the adolescent and the early adult, that this intellectual break offers new opportunities, right? It's often a time that we're exposed to new people and new ideas, new surroundings. And as we're thinking and working through these ideas, they offer, as I had experienced, they offer a greater sense of self. They offer new forms of expression. But there's also danger that comes along where the person can fall into certain ideas that they cling to, or become overly rigid in their ideas, or become overly committed to a school of thought. And so this kind of over dependence and over attachment to a theory in some ways can be normal because the young adult is transitioning, right? And so it's very hard to become totally independent all at once, that oftentimes we require some type of support through that process of becoming more autonomous, becoming more independent. And so sometimes a more fixed belief structure can support that process. But I mean, either way, the goal is for the individual to learn to think independently and not be so defined by group membership, or so attached to a group membership that they sacrifice their own independent thoughts, their own doubts, their own worldview in order to fit into the ideology of the group or the belief system of the group. And so she says here, comparing this parallel between infancy and early adulthood, she says, the nature of the initial relationship between parents and child will determine what forms the adolescent's liberation will assume in adult life, and whether his or her new sense of security turns into a second, and this time permanent, prison. Okay? And post-adolescence, a feeling of security is generally prized more highly than freedom. So we have this really important transition here where we're defining our lives for ourselves, and we have this potential trap of falling into, again, another kind of fixed ideology or a fixed belief system. And so, I don't know, it's a really tricky thing, and it's a really difficult thing to navigate. And so it was something that I wanted to kind of relate back to my own experiences. So for me, I would say about 19 years old, reading became just incredibly important. I had tried kind of picking up the habit of reading. It was something that I wanted to get into in high school, and so I tried reading books that other people valued and thought were interesting. And to more or less some success, I was able to get more into reading or develop a relationship with reading somewhat in high school. But it wasn't really until I got into early college and really kind of was making that transition into my own that I found myself in reading, and that I found myself in writing as well. And one book that really kind of caught my attention at that time was Jack Kerouac's On the Road. And I have such a funny kind of thought about it, or feeling in relationship to it, because there's ways that I'm very critical of that book now, that just don't seem to fit or just seem out of place. Kind of a lot of it's like wild behavior and all the kind of drugs and craziness are a little bit, are too much in that book. He goes through really kind of unhealthy extremes in a lot of ways. But I really admired it almost as a kind of retelling of the Odyssey, where Kerouac is, kind of breaking off. He was just divorced. He's also breaking off from his family, and he's going off on the road, and he's traveling, and he's going off on this adventure and really defining his life for himself. So I really related to that book, and it really became just that one book that kind of hooked me into reading. And, since then I've just continued, reading has been an essential feature of my life. But anyway, so, my love for reading eventually kind of transitioned into me wanting to major in English in college, and I also found philosophy as well. So I minored in philosophy and even took a number of philosophy classes that ended up being essentially a second major in philosophy. So philosophy and literature both became really major aspects of my life. And I always had a bit of a complicated relationship with the university with school. Growing up in school, I had a number of difficult experiences. I really had a hard time with the standardized testing and the kind of over rigidity of the structure, the way that it was really unforgiving. Even at times at third grade, I was, medicated with Adderall and Ritalin and all these things, which was unfortunately a really problematic trend that happened in the 90s and probably still continues today, but really increased and became a really active or became a very dominant kind of way of forcing kids to conform to a very narrow and rigid system. It's still, I would say, is still kind of a factory model system of education, right? Where the emphasis is on uniformity, standardization, homogenization, making everybody the same, rather than figuring out who people are as individuals and discovering their own strengths and discovering their own creativity. So I always had kind of a mixed relationship with school where I had a lot of negative experiences, but also there were times in school growing up where I found some freedom and was connecting with the material or had cool teachers or creative friends that allowed me to find my own sense of space and freedom and independence, and where I wasn't so rigidly forced into a mold. And in a lot of ways, university education opened up a broader relationship to education to me as well. I loved my world literature class. I loved my existentialism class. I loved the more discussion-based model that I saw in the humanities where, it wasn't about taking quizzes or memorizing material. It was about doing the reading and coming to class and having these open discussions about the books and, really putting in the work to work out our own ideas on what we're reading and what we're doing. And so, although I had a complicated relationship with school, and at times I was frustrated with the way that factory model of education continues into higher education, the way that we still had very rigid deadlines, and the writing assignments at times forced the students to be more formulaic to meet requirements or to complete work within a really set time frame. And then also midterms, the whole cycle of like midterms and final exams. Learning starts here, learning stops here. Just the way that it still fell into those patterns, I found really difficult to navigate and deal with. And so, I don't know. And then on the other side, though, with university, I admired the access to those resources, access to other people that are reading the same thing and discussing it, right? Access to professors who were so well read and knowledgeable that they provided support in my own reading and kind of my own introduction to this bigger world of the history of literature and the history of philosophy and all these ideas and concepts that I just found myself really connecting with and growing in. And also support giving me feedback on my writing and opportunities to grow and develop my writing. So there were a lot of resources in the university that I really admired. But again, I kind of wanted to move into the negative aspect then. So I definitely experienced a lot of growth and expansion through my relationship with reading and even through my university studies. But I would say as I continued on and later got the desire to go to graduate school, I found more of the troubling aspects of it to kind of come to the forefront. And also time had passed. In the early 2000s, education looked one way, and as kind of economic policies have continued that aren't funding university, as kind of this prejudice against humanities education has continued to be in place, and people focus more and more on career training and kind of have developed this like work readiness ideology about education and the way that education has become more financialized. It's more expensive. People are having to borrow more. People are getting more in debt. The cost of living is higher. So it all kind of forces education into even more of this factory model and more of this kind of standardization and less of this kind of higher thinking and developing our capacities to think critically. But all that aside, or all that to the side, I've kind of found just my attachment to the university to be something that's really hard to deal with or understand or kind of wrap my head around. And so I would say one thing is that I love the university as a resource, but I found in graduate school and when I was considering going on immediately after graduate school to pursue a PhD, which I decided not to do, I decided to pause and wait, and haven't gone back since finishing my master's, is that as you continue on, there's a lot of just the system is in crisis and it ends up reinforcing a lot of bad behaviors and belief structures. So because there's so many limited opportunities for people once they get a PhD, that to actually work in the humanities, only about 2% of people that get a PhD actually get an opportunity to become full professors and have that be a career and something that's viable and something that they're supported in. It's a very small percentage of people that actually get those jobs, and so it's incredibly competitive, and people make a lot of sacrifices in order to, as they're studying their PhD, even in order to try to publish academic articles, build up a basis of research, in order to land those jobs and get those professor jobs. And then everybody else is just kind of stuck, having to adapt and find other careers, see if they can apply the skills that they acquired through studying, humanities or studying a PhD to other careers and other disciplines. And so what's happened as a result of that, and maybe this goes back even before that, is that the people that are successful in academia are people that have really shut themselves down in a particular way, have really kind of cut themselves off from who they are as a total person, and really been able to focus on creating this kind of false self or creating this more limited understanding of who they are in order to succeed. And so, if I can break off from my emotional needs or my needs for friendship and my needs for connection and spend more time reading and more time writing and producing articles, if I can sacrifice my need to write about something that I truly care about and instead write about something that is trendy or write about something that would do well on a kind of almost like marketplace of ideas where, it's gonna be a topic that gets published. It's gonna be a topic that people are talking about, that they're actively interested in. So as people kind of focus more on that, meeting the demands of the system, meeting the demands of a more market-based university, they become more disassociated from themselves, and they also become more what is described by the psychologist Winnicott in attachment theory. They don't align so much with their true self. They align more with a kind of false persona. He says false self, false, like very limited, constructed version of who they are. And so I just feel a bit at a crossroads in my own career, in my own thinking. I love learning. I love a lot of the professors that I've had in my university studies. I love the people that I've met. I really, miss that conversation, being able to have a seminar, graduate seminar with, maybe let's say there's just 10 students in the class and we're all reading the same thing. Everybody else is very well read and informed, and we're able to have these really deep, in-depth discussions about our reading, about the topics that we're reading. And so I love that community and I love that environment, but it's so suffocated by the limited of access to jobs, the limitation in resources, and the opportunities to get better funding and support that and just financially, it wouldn't be something that would work for me to continue on to study for a PhD, but also in terms of respecting myself and respecting myself as a learner. I find that forcing myself into that mold where, oftentimes in graduate school, a lot of programs, they want you to finish quickly. So they try to get you to take 3 graduate courses a semester, which is a lot, right? Where you're writing really long essays and doing a lot of reading. And then sometimes most of the time your funding is supported by teaching, and the school has a financial interest in making you teach as much as possible. So oftentimes on top of studying more than full time, you're teaching, two, sometimes 3 classes a semester, and they're undergraduate classes that involve a lot of grading, a lot of reading essays multiple times, reading multiple drafts in order to get the students to actually create something that that aligns with what would be a reasonable expectation for early college. And so that's a lot of work. And then on top of that, the funding is oftentimes, even if you're fully funded, isn't enough to live on. So people have to continue to take out even more loans and get more in debt. And then all that leads to a situation where there's not a guaranteed job on the other side. And in fact, the job is more than likely not going to be there. And a lot of people then find themselves adjuncting, teaching part-time, having very teaching heavy, even if they get full-time work, it's very teaching heavy, and they don't have any support in their own writing and their research that would allow them to continue to grow in their careers and get new opportunities. So the whole system is really broken. And I think about certain professors that I admired at a young age, and the way that I appreciate their influence, but also the way that I absorbed in a negative way certain work habits and attitudes toward writing and reading that I think or that I know are negative and unhealthy ways of thinking about it. So just this idea that you are constantly working, like becoming very identified with your writing, and not only identified with your writing, but the way that that's connected to success in your career or opportunities for funding for more studies or for funding for, doing more research or for better positions. And so it just is a very constant, this kind of idea. This is only this environment of like work, 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 work. If you take a break for yourself or do something for yourself, you should feel guilty about that. And so it's just not a healthy attitude or way of the world. So I don't know. So it's just interesting. So I think a lot about these different things. I have, education, and then it's like you have schooling, you have education, and then the system of schooling, and then you also have career. And it's easy for all of those to blend together, or to want those to blend together. And the way in mixing those things, it's hard to separate out what's healthy and what's not healthy. And so, I don't know. I love reading. Reading is such a big part of my life. Writing is such a big part of my life. But then if I want to continue to pursue it in academia, that oftentimes leads to a kind of almost exploitation or mistreatment of that art and of that interest in order to commodify it in a way, or in order to shove it into a very narrow, like I said, factory model type system. And so I'm kind of at a pause, or just kind of stepping back and thinking about that and what I'd like to do. I love teaching at the college level. I love connecting with college-age students, and that was such a big moment of transition for me in my life. I think that's one reason that I really identify with teaching at that level, where students are really at a prime moment to be exposed to literature, to be exposed to more philosophy, and to really start working out these ideas for themselves. I think it's a really excellent time for education, especially the humanities. But at the same time, opportunities are so few. There's a lot of sacrifice, like, this kind of idealization of a kind of sacrifice in order to fit into this very narrow role, because these positions are so limited. And so, so I really don't know what I think about that. I think that that doesn't sound like a system that I want to participate in. But then on the other side, I feel like it has a lot of resources that can be very helpful and supportive. And so more recently, I've kind of moved into finding other means of finding other people to connect with, and who are also interested in learning and growing and reading books and engaging in that kind of intellectual way outside of the university. So that's a project that I've been working on. I've been kind of organizing various reading groups. I'll include links to that in this video, but just opportunities for people here locally in Miami to connect and share ideas and to really create that kind of commons or that space where we're all contributing and hopefully benefiting from each other's interest in reading and each other's ideas and intelligence, and able to grow in our own learning. If you're a writer, to grow in our own writing as well. So that's where I'm putting more of my effort right now, in terms of that. Then I teach college writing. I would love better opportunities to teach literature and engage more with literature rather than just essay writing. And that's another video that I could get into another time. A lot of people in in an area of English called rhetoric composition have really kind of pushed for the idea that early college students should be just learning to write essays in a very kind of pragmatic, or I don't even call it pragmatic. It's almost overly, I think, kind of technical ideal of what writing is. And I really feel out of place with that, because the question isn't just about writing, but it's about literacy. And I think the best way that young people can increase their literacy and be exposed to ideas and grow in their learning is to actually read books that are fictional, that are literary, read philosophical books, right? Not just learn to write, read like opinion pieces or read academic articles and write essays in a very structured, cookie cutter way, but actually develop a relationship to reading in a more profound way. So I've kind of rambled on. Those are my thoughts. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope that maybe they also encourage you to kind of reflect on what your early attachment experience was, what your early family experience was, and what role that writing and pursuing intellectual efforts plays in your current life.